Imagine stumbling upon a forgotten mountain cabin, hidden deep in the pines, and buying it for just 25 cents. Sounds impossible, right? That's exactly what happened to Michael Harris, a quiet schoolteacher who thought he'd scored the deal of a lifetime. But what started as a dream quickly twisted into a nightmare. Because 1 year later, that dusty little cabin was suddenly worth $10 million, and that's when the HOA showed up, claiming it belonged to them. Michael Harris had always been fascinated by forgotten places, the kind of hidden corners most people walk past without noticing. One chilly autumn afternoon, while hiking through the dense hills outside Pinecrest, he spotted something unusual in the distance, a small, weathered cabin almost swallowed by the towering pines. Its wooden walls leaned with age, the roof sagged under decades of neglect, and ivy crept up the cracked windows. At first glance, it looked abandoned. But a faded "For Sale" sign dangled from a rusted nail, swaying gently in the mountain breeze. Curiosity got the better of him. He jotted down the number and called later that evening, half expecting it to be disconnected. To his surprise, an elderly woman answered. Her voice was frail, trembling, as though she hadn't spoken to anyone in weeks. When Michael asked about the cabin, she chuckled softly and said, almost casually, "I'll sell it to you for $25, if you promise to take care of it." Michael thought she was joking, but she wasn't. She explained that the cabin had been in her family for generations, but everyone had moved away. She couldn't maintain it anymore, and the property taxes were eating her alive. She just wanted it gone. 2 days later, Michael drove out to meet her in person. The woman, whose name was Margaret, handed him a single-page deed and accepted his 25 cents, an old, worn coin he dug out of his pocket. No lawyers. No real estate agents. No inspections. Just a handshake and a promise. It felt surreal, almost too easy, and maybe, Michael thought, too good to be true. For the first few months, everything was peaceful. Michael fixed a few leaks, swept away years of dust, and turned the cabin into his weekend escape from the chaos of city life. It was quiet, calming, almost like stepping back in time. But then, one rainy afternoon, while repairing a warped wooden floorboard, Michael's hammer struck something solid. He pried up the plank and discovered a metal box buried beneath the floor. Inside, wrapped in brittle newspaper, were old documents, maps, and something else, something that would change everything and turn his 25-cent cabin into a $10 million property. Michael sat frozen on the creaky wooden floor, the metal box resting in his lap, his hands trembling as he peeled back the brittle layers of yellowed newspaper. Inside were documents so old they looked ready to disintegrate. At first, he didn't understand what he was holding, but then his eyes widened as he realized what he had discovered, land ownership records dating back over a century. These weren't ordinary deeds. They included maps showing mineral rights, logging boundaries, and something far more valuable, a signed contract from 1892 granting whoever owned the cabin full rights to the surrounding 500 acres of land. Back then, the land was worth next to nothing. But today, those very hills sat atop one of the richest lithium deposits in the entire state. Within weeks, news broke that a tech company had offered $10 million to purchase the land outright. Michael couldn't believe his luck. His little weekend escape, the cabin he bought for $25, was now sitting on a literal gold mine. For a brief moment, it felt like his life had completely changed. He imagined paying off debts, traveling the world, maybe even retiring early. But just as his excitement peaked, a letter arrived in the mail that turned his dream into a nightmare. It came from the Pinecrest Homeowners Association, an HOA Michael didn't even know existed. According to their letter, his cabin, and the surrounding 500 acres, legally belonged to them. They claimed that Margaret, the elderly woman who sold him the property, had failed to pay HOA fees for over 20 years. Because of that, they argued, the entire property had reverted back to the HOA before Michael ever purchased it. Confused and panicked, Michael contacted a lawyer, only to discover something even more disturbing. The HOA had quietly filed a lien on the land years ago, hoping nobody would notice. They had been waiting, watching, and the moment the lithium discovery became public, they pounced. Michael realized this wasn't just about paperwork or missed payments, this was about power, greed, and a fight he never saw coming. The HOA wasn't backing down, and neither was he. At first, Michael thought it was just a misunderstanding, a simple paperwork error that a quick phone call could fix. But when he reached out to the Pinecrest HOA, he was met with cold silence, until the threats began. Within days, he started receiving letters marked, "Final Notice," warning that if he didn't surrender the property, the HOA would take him to court, seize the cabin, and demand back payments totaling over $150,000. Michael was stunned. He had never signed up for any HOA, never agreed to their rules, and had never even known Pinecrest had one. But the HOA claimed the original deed Margaret signed decades ago had automatically placed the property under their control, a clause buried so deep in legal jargon that even most attorneys missed it. Things escalated quickly. Strange SUVs began parking near the cabin, their tinted windows reflecting the forest like silent watchers. On more than one occasion, Michael caught men with clipboards taking photos of his property. The HOA even sent an inspection team without his permission, claiming they had a right to assess community assets. Michael refused to be bullied. He hired a legal team and began digging into the HOA's history, and what he found made his blood run cold. This wasn't their first takeover attempt. For years, the Pinecrest HOA had been quietly targeting properties with valuable land rights, using loopholes, liens, and intimidation to force owners out and claim the assets for themselves. But Michael had something they didn't expect: proof. Inside the metal box were not just deeds and maps but original signed documents showing that his property predated the HOA's formation entirely. If these documents held up in court, the HOA's claims would collapse. That's when the harassment worsened. Anonymous phone calls. Emails with no sender. A rock thrown through the cabin's window late one night. Someone wanted Michael to give up before the case ever reached a judge. Still, Michael refused to back down. He wasn't just fighting for his cabin anymore, he was fighting for his right to keep what was his. And as the court date approached, both sides prepared for a showdown that could cost Michael everything, or make him a millionaire. The courtroom was silent as Michael sat at the plaintiff's table, clutching the weathered metal box that had started it all. Across from him sat the Pinecrest HOA board members, their attorneys lined up like soldiers preparing for war. The judge entered, and the battle began. For hours, the HOA's lawyers argued that Margaret's unpaid fees invalidated Michael's purchase. They painted him as a careless buyer who failed to do his due diligence. But when Michael's attorney stood up and presented the original deeds and 1892 mineral rights contracts, the atmosphere shifted instantly. The documents showed, beyond any doubt, that Michael's cabin and the surrounding 500 acres were established before the HOA even existed. The HOA's lead attorney tried to argue that their liens still applied, but the judge interrupted sharply. You cannot claim ownership over land your organization never had jurisdiction over. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Michael felt his heart pounding, but he knew it wasn't over yet. Just when victory seemed within reach, the HOA dropped a bombshell. They produced a secret contract signed decades ago by Margaret's father, allegedly handing over certain development rights to Pinecrest. If the judge accepted it, Michael could lose everything. But his attorney examined the paper closely and spotted something stunning: the signatures didn't match. Under cross-examination, the HOA's expert witness admitted the document was forged. The judge slammed his gavel and delivered the verdict. Michael owned the cabin. He owned the 500 acres. And he owned the $10 million lithium rights outright. The HOA's claim was dismissed with prejudice, and the court ordered them to pay Michael's legal fees. But even in victory, Michael couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. The Pinecrest HOA had deep pockets and powerful connections. Today, he had one. Tomorrow, no one knew what they'd try next. Michael's story became a cautionary tale about hidden HOA agendas and how far they'll go for money and power. If you've ever faced an HOA nightmare, or know someone who has, share your story in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe to HOA Case Files for more shocking real-life cases like this one. You won't believe what we uncover next.